Good afternoon, everyone. Some folks may still be coming in from the waiting room, but I do want to go ahead and get started. My name is Celeste Green. I'm one of the OBGYN residents here at UNC. We're happy to have all of you with us today. I know it's a difficult day to have our attention focused elsewhere and hard to know what to say regarding the current election that's still, fresh in our minds, and we're all waiting anxiously to find out the result. I do want to speak on behalf of the residents in this room with me and the entire group of 28 here at UNC, and say that we remain committed to advocating for every single patient who gives us the honor of being their physician, regardless of their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, their abilities, their countries of origin. We are interested only in respecting their humanity and taking the best care of them that we can. Our pledge is that we'll continue this series, starting with today's amazing speaker, and continue these conversations in an effort to continue playing an active and productive role in creating a more equitable healthcare system and a more equitable country. So with that, I'm very, very excited to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Okanlami, or Dr. O, who is an assistant professor of family medicine in physical medicine and rehabilitation and in urology at Michigan Medicine, is our speaker today. He serves as the Wolverines interim director of services for students with disabilities. He's the director of adaptive sports and fitness within the Division of Student Life at the University of Michigan. Dr. O is also the director of adaptive sports in the Michigan Center for Human Athletic Medicine and Performance, and is a spokesperson for Guardian Life and their Equal and Able partnership. So he's very busy, y'all. He's born in Nigeria and immigrated to the United States at a young age. And Dr. O attended Deerfield Academy for high school, then went on to Stanford University for college and served there as captain of his track and field team, and he was an academic All-American. He then went to the University of Michigan for his MD before matching into orthopedic surgery at Yale. At the beginning of his third year of residency, he experienced a spinal cord injury, which paralyzed him from the chest down. After 2 surgeries and intense rehabilitation, he was blessed with some return of motor function. Then he went on to do the following: earn a master's degree in engineering, science, and technology and entrepreneurship from the, technology entrepreneurship from the University of Notre Dame. He then completed his family medicine residency at Memorial Hospital in South Bend, Indiana. He is a distinguished member of the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society, has received numerous awards, including Michigan Medicine's Distinguished Early Career Alumni Award in 2020, and was also given the Teacher's Teacher Award by the Academy of Medical Educators. Nationally, Dr. O serves as a disability issues representative on the steering committee for the Group on Diversity and Inclusion at the AAMC and the National Medical Association's Council on Medical Legislation. He speaks around the country on topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including but not limited to the lack of Black male physicians in the United States and creating a health system that is accessible and inclusive to both patients and providers with disabilities. Today, we are very, very excited to have Dr. O speak with us, giving his signature talk, Disabusing Disability, demonstrating that disability doesn't mean inability. So I'm excited to share the microphone and hand over the floor to Dr. O.
Thank you very much, Dr. Green. Hold a second so I can then share my screen as well. But I appreciate this invitation. And I tell people, and I was talking to Ty and Bria before we started, and I said that I don't like giving talks, right? But what I do like doing is I like starting conversations. So what I hope for this to be is I hope that this will be an interactive conversation, truly, where you all feel free to chime in whenever you can, because if at the end of today my voice is the only voice you end up hearing, then I feel as though I've done each of you a disservice, in that each of you has perspectives and ideas about the different topics that we'll talk about today. And if I don't allow you all the space to then engage in that conversation, I don't think that we're going to be doing the best that we can. So with that, and based on what Dr. Green brought up as well, please feel free to use the chat. Now, I want the chat to be a safe and welcoming space so that if you choose to send me a private message, that is something that I will acknowledge without recognizing who it is that said it, because I want to make sure that, you know, if there are concerns or questions that you may have that you may not feel comfortable having everyone else hear you say, I'm perfectly comfortable with you putting those things in the chat. In addition to that, given what is happening right as we speak, I recognize that many of you will be distracted, and I actually take that opportunity to say, if something changes right now, please put it in the chat so I can know too, you know, because I'm not looking at my phone or my iPad, and I want to be actively engaged in what is happening in our political landscape as well. And it's impossible to have this conversation today without recognizing essentially where we are. And I think that's another important point to make before I even start, which will be a thread that carries through my presentation today. Looking at what is happening in our nation right now demonstrates the fact that our world and our country is very much divided. And I think that it's easy for people to say that there are the goods and the bads in that conversation. But what this is showing each of us is that there are people that have vastly different understandings of what we should do. And each of those individuals comes with a conviction that they believe is true based on the set of experiences that they have had. So what I hope for this to be today is to recognize that everybody comes to this conversation from a different perspective. And I think it's easy to demonize or to ostracize or to polarize these conversations in a way that we come away thinking that there's a right and a wrong and something that I should do and something that I shouldn't do. But I think that if we all recognize that we are all much more similar than we are different, then we will be able to truly lead towards a conversation that is truly demonstrating the ideals of diversity, equity, inclusion, and advocacy that this IDEA lecture series is really bringing up. So I thank you for the opportunity. And as I said, I'm going to talk about one specific topic, but because of the intersectionality of my life and of my world, it's going to be impossible to then speak about disability alone without speaking directly about the intersections of disability and race and the way that my personal existence has impacted my journey. And that's why I really want people to be able to engage. And I will do my best to then, as I said, keep an eye on the chat. So Dr. Green is also going to be paying attention and helping me out in case I miss something in the chat that someone has asked some time ago. I'll try my best to keep up with it. So once again, please engage as best you can and to the degree and extent to which you are comfortable, and feel free to send me a private message and I will do my best to incorporate that as we speak. So as she said, this is Disabusing Disability, trying to demonstrate to folks that disability doesn't mean inability. I credit some other individuals with this presentation because the current iteration that I'm using, I had some of my team put it together for another presentation, which I sort of modified for this one. So I want to give credit to Eric Robesniks, who is our program manager at the University of Michigan and Michigan Medicine for Adaptive Sports and Fitness, Dr. Johan Latour, who is a PM&R resident, who's been working with our team, and also Matthew Fritzy, who's one of our students who has been participating in our program as well. So this will be my first opportunity to try to engage you all. I show this slide many times, and the different permutations of interpretations people come up with this slide never cease to amaze me in terms of what people think when they see this. So if someone says that they love this image, and I'm going to go back to that individual and say, so tell me what you think of. And this is where when I call you out, feel free to unmute and chime in, but tell me what you think of when you see this image. Now, something else that I try to do is, in terms of trying to acknowledge disability as an aspect of diversity, you know, and this sometimes takes a longer time in presentations, but I think it's important. I describe every image that I show as well, because there may be individuals on this call that are low vision and aren't able to see it, and they would not be fully included in this conversation if we continue talking about it without describing it. So the image that we all see here has two sides, and there are three individuals that are on the outside of a fence, and there is a game going on inside of this fence. It looks like a baseball field. These three individuals are then on one side, standing on one box each, and then the word underneath says equality. And those individuals are varying heights such that the tallest one can see over the fence and would be able to see over the fence without the box. The middle person is then seeing over the fence with the box. The shortest person cannot see over the fence even with the box. On the other side of the image, it says equity underneath. And then the shortest individual has two boxes, which now allow them to see. The middle individual is still with one box able to see. And then the tallest individual has no boxes and is seeing into the game. So that is the slide. And I would welcome any comments in the chat or anyone unmuting themselves to say, if you have seen this before, or even if you haven't seen it before, tell me what emotions or thoughts or opinions or perspectives come from this slide when you see it.
Dr. Okanlami, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm an educator. I am viewing this presentation and listening, participating on one computer, and my 7th grade classes are on another. And I say that just to say, on a daily basis, I have to think about this situation of equity. And I was writing, especially during this time of teaching virtually, which I'm sitting in my home. I've got to weigh and think about, am I reaching everyone as best as I can? Some kids are home, some are in the gym at school because I'm not there. So if you're not on campus with your children, then they're placed in a pod. They've got to check in. They've got to hear me. Some can't hear. So what do I do? What am I doing to try to reach every child? And clearly, everyone here could take this same situation and put it in their own setting. But I've got to think about this as an educator, and certainly when I was raising children as a parent as well. And then, of course, there are far-reaching effects too, as we live our daily lives. But that's what came to me first.
So since you were the brave soul to volunteer first, you said you have to think about this often. Now, when you say think about this, what is the this that you were thinking about? And I'm also going to call out Madison Jones if Madison wants to chime in at any point, because Madison said, as a teacher working in a Title I school, a very high poverty area, this image is all too familiar. Now, once again, I want to remind each other that no one has really stated what this image represents yet. And so what is it that this image means to you when you say you have to think about this?
Okay, so what I have to think about is who needs access, who doesn't have access, who has a computer in their home, who has a computer that functions well, whose computer constantly breaks and they're telling me that they got kicked out, who does not have internet service, and so they can't get the work done that I want to say demanding or that I'm asking for. For whom do I have to break my own rules and classroom policies and give an extension of a deadline rather than hold them fast to a deadline? So the equity and the equality thing, for whom do I reach out to other resources to see if I can get them help that they or their parents might not have access to? What can I do to make to create the picture on the right more so than the one on the left?
Okay, thank you. Ashley, are you willing to chime in and share some of your thoughts? And I'm sorry I cut Madison off. I didn't know if Madison wanted to speak.
Oh, I'm here, Dr. O. Thank you. I'm sorry. My phone keeps going in and out, so hopefully everybody can hear me. I, too, am an educator, as I stated in my response. And in the area where I'm working, online teaching right now is an extremely big challenge that we're facing to make sure that we're reaching all students. In the area where I teach, issues like working devices, having internet in the home, and still managing to make sure our children are safe and getting the education they need has been a huge challenge for us. And so when I think about equity, I think about it feels sometimes like the hoops that we jump through to make sure that all of our students are able to access the same content, and then also manage to get the accommodations that they need in order to perform on the same playing field. So that may look like getting kids to come into the school and do testing so that they're not missing out on getting their assessments taken. I think often we focus on on equality. However, when I look at the school where I work, it's not equal to many other schools where the schoolhouse itself is empty because all of the children have access to working internet and devices, and parents who can stay home with them and monitor them all day. So yeah, that's how that affects me right now when I look at that picture.
So I'm going to comment. Thank you, Madison. I'm going to comment on several of the messages people sent in the chat by saying all of the messages that I've seen thus far seem to approach this from somewhat of a, what I like to call a preaching to the choir mentality. I think that everybody is seeing this from the same vantage point with different sort of perspectives on the same theme. Now, what I will tell you is that when I show this slide, seldom do people say it out loud, but I've gotten comments that they've come to me later in the reviews for the presentation, or there are times where I put my presentations publicly and people comment like a Yelp style. And will I tell you that sometimes, and more often than you would imagine, what I get is people say, why don't those insert a racial expletive slur here, buy tickets like everybody else and watch the game from inside? Now I say that because we need to recognize that there are two sides to each fence. And you need to realize that the people inside the fence feel as though the fence is there for a reason. And sometimes that fence is there for a real reason that's necessary. Sometimes that fence is there to keep people out. Other times that fence is there to keep people in. And then we are all talking about the people outside of the fence and how the people outside of the fence need to have access to what's inside the fence, before we've even talked about whether the people outside of the fence deserve access to what is inside the fence, or how it is that they are not getting that access. And so that is where I start with on this first slide, because I think, and once again, today is the perfect time to then have this conversation, because there's certain things that we probably have been seeing in what's happening in our country that we think, how could anyone possibly not see it this way? How is it that this conversation about healthcare is really something that's polarizing? How could it be that wearing masks is seen as a problem? How could somebody actually criticize what we are trying to do in terms of protecting the lives of individuals in our country? And until we recognize, and this conversation is about facts and truth and just like being blatantly honest, and that's what I want everybody to be in this conversation, is that until we recognize that not everybody thinks the way we think, we're not going to be able to move the needle as much as we want to, because oftentimes when we see things our way and we don't find a common ground to be able to start having conversations, people are going to dig their heels in and not want to hear the things that we have to say. Now, I will tell you that before going too far into this theme, I'll call some things out that have happened in the different times I give these presentations. As people are listening to me, I'm sure there's some of you that are questioning and thinking, what is this guy saying? Is he saying that we need to just put up with the nonsense that we see? I've been called an Uncle Tom. I've been called all sorts of names because people think that what I'm trying to say is we need to put up with terrible negative things in order to then stay in the system. Now, what I tell people is that I absolutely am not saying that. But what I am saying is that if we choose to be part of a system that is broken, what we need to do is we need to remain in the system long enough to get to the top of the system to change the system. And sometimes, and this is just fact, sometimes if you are too vocal about how broken the system is, because of the individuals that are determining the rules of that system, they will find ways to silence your voice. Now, this is what each individual has to choose how they want to advocate and how they are going to then leverage the position they are in. And I will tell you that I have recognized in the past several months and years in my role that as a Black man, as a Nigerian man, as a disabled man, as a Christian man, as a physician, as an individual with 2 physician parents that then went to prep school in Stanford and Michigan and Yale and Notre Dame, I have a particular position of privilege that has allowed me to then speak in ways that I have not been able to then support all of my students in speaking in that same way. Because I recognize that this space is not yet safe. And what's happening right now demonstrates that you may think that we are safer than we truly are, but the opinions of people are being borne out right now when we see what is going on. So this isn't meant to be a negative statement. This isn't meant to be some sort of doomsday prophecy. This is just saying that we all need to then recognize where we're even starting from and the conversations that people are having around these things that then lead to people that do not believe the same thing we believe and show that the reality of what this picture really is this picture. And so once again, in keeping with how I described the last image, this image that I've now gone to has a third panel, which has the tallest individual standing on top of multiple boxes, so high that they are well above the fence. And then it has the medium-sized individual standing still on their one box, and it has the smallest individual now standing in a box-size hole. This is the reality of the haves and the have-nots. And what some people will say when they see this slide is they'll say, well, what did that small person do to then dig that hole for themselves? It should not be our responsibility to give our boxes up for that person. Oftentimes people say it's not fair that the taller person had to give his or her box to the smaller person. If I work hard for my boxes, why should I have to give my box to somebody else? And so this is what people are thinking. These are the conversations that are happening in the boardrooms and at the executive tables and in places and spaces where sometimes underrepresented and marginalized groups are seldom present. And that is why oftentimes we are left out. The other facet of this argument in the conversation is that I showed this slide and a softball player said, the fence is there because if I try to hit a home run and there's no fence, there's no way for me to be able to know if that was a home run or not. So we didn't put the fence there to keep people out. We put the fence there to keep things in. And if something went out, that was a metric that we used to measure our success from inside this game. And so when you look at it from a different vantage point, and you see that sometimes the people inside don't even recognize the people that they are keeping out, but then if we have a conversation where we all come to the table and we say, well, what if the fence was chain link? What if it was see-through? What if there were ways where we could still give people access? Because there's one form of advocacy where people say we need to just break down the fence, tear down the wall, and that's what we should do. But that doesn't often achieve the desired goal. People were commenting in it about how sometimes equity misses the mark by not recognizing the fact that we all have a goal that we should be accomplishing, and that equality and equity don't always then address that. Someone says that people are all given the same resources despite each person, or people are given the same resources despite their differences, versus each person receiving the assistance that's specific to their needs. Now, what those needs are is something that somebody else referred to as the absolutely unfair but equally unavoidable truth that each individual is born with completely different tools to succeed in life, yet everyone is expected to accomplish equal success. Now, that's a beautiful one, because what I talk about when I talk about accommodations in the work that we do, I talk about accommodations providing people with the access that they deserve. I say access because we all deserve the same amount of access, but access does not guarantee success. Access merely provides people with the opportunity to then demonstrate what it is they can do to then show their success. Accommodations are not an unfair advantage. Accommodations are not a leg up. Accommodations are merely trying to recognize that the society and the world in which we live was systemically and historically created to disadvantage certain populations, and we have perpetuated that system, and many of us may not even recognize how we perpetuated that system ourselves by being complicit to a system that then does those things. Now, someone talked about body language, and I don't want to make the assumption, people have mentioned this multiple times, but I want to then let Khadija chime in. If Khadija wants to then talk about why body language is important in this image before I keep moving on. So Khadija, if you're willing, please unmute and speak up. If I'll give you a second, and if I don't hear, I'll just keep moving on.
Yeah, so I was looking at equity, and it almost looks like a selfless picture. Like everyone looks like happy for the other person, specifically the person in the red looking at the person, and I don't know if it's a guy or not, but looking at the person in the purple shirt. Everyone is enjoying the game, versus equality. Of course, the person in the purple shirt, they're not enjoying, and it's almost as if the other two people aren't even acknowledging that he's not enjoying the game or can even see the game. So I think, body language and the way this picture is portrayed is also an interesting perspective.
Thank you, Khadija. And I will say that I'm never able to talk about all of the different interpretations of this image, but one thing, and I've given it in multiple different spaces, and there was another OB group that I spoke to that they referenced this image, and when I showed the first one, someone chimed in and said, I don't see any problem with this image because this is just demonstrating the lifespan. And the child should not be given the same access as their older brother or their dad. And so if we're talking about access and resources, I wouldn't expect a toddler to then get the same thing that the adult should get. So they said, this to me is not a problem. And then somebody else said, well, how do you know that that person is not just a dwarf or a little person, such that they are fully grown, but this is just how tall that they will be, right? And so it stimulated conversation to say, once again, the cliche statement of a picture is worth 1,000 words is really true, because when we show an image, right, the interpretations of that image are so vast. And I tell people that if we can have these conversations merely about an image of people trying to watch a baseball game, that we need to then understand the basic tenets of this image before we can get to more complicated things such as funding diversity, equity, and inclusion programming at academic medical centers. Because that is the context in which I talk about this most, is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not something that people have valued in a tangible way, such that they provide the same resources to these programs as they do the programs that they see as important. And when we don't recognize that the reason that these resources aren't being allocated is because the people that are inside the game making the decisions for where the fence is going to be and how many people it's going to keep out do not actually think that the people outside the game need to be inside or need to be able to see. And we need to start there by saying that for whatever reason, people are not valuing diversity, equity, inclusion, advocacy, and the way that those of us outside of the fence view it. And we need to be able to then come to the table with a conversation in a way that can allow them to see why this is something that is not just of benefit to those of us outside of the fence, but is truly something that benefits everyone inside the fence, outside the fence, and not even at the game. Because what this is doing is this is truly providing the resources and the access for everyone and what they need and deserve, and it is not giving some sort of unfair advantage. The other thing that came up in this image is that people talk about how there are only men in this image, right? Which is another assumption that people make. We don't know if they're men or women, but once again, it can look like, yes, this is an image that then is excluding men. I mean, excluding women. Like, why didn't we include women in this image? And so many people will go and say, well, this is another indication of what our society is like. We are not listening to the voices of women at the leadership tables. We don't have them at the table. They don't have a seat. And so we need to then be able to recognize who is not there and then create access for them as well. And so this is how I start these conversations, hoping that people will then kind of open up their minds to the understanding that there are still many things that have many, many sides, and we need to be able to find our similarities and be able to understand from the beginning what conversation we're having. Because if we didn't start having some of these conversations, we may then go into the end of this presentation assuming we were all on the same page as to what this image represents, because people would think that this image represented a positive thing about how we all need to provide equity. And then other people will be looking at this image and thinking this is exactly what's wrong with our country, is that they're expecting me to give my boxes up to these other people, and by no means am I going to do that. And that's how I learned this from multiple times, not having those conversations at the beginning, and then recognizing at the end that I inadvertently created a space that did not allow everyone to feel safe and open in speaking. Because I led the conversation by making them think that I was going to go down a certain path and that I wasn't going to be sort of welcoming to their perspectives. And that's something that is really important that we do not do when we have these conversations, because you may be surprised what you can learn about what these other people think. And it doesn't mean that at the end of the day you agree with what they think, but what we need to do is be able to have the opportunity for civil discourse, to hear other people's perspectives. And within medicine, the part that I bring this back home to is that within medicine, we then have a duty and an obligation to take care of all of our patients, regardless of what they think about this image. But it does not mean that we are not entitled to our own beliefs and opinions as to how we choose to advocate. And that's a conversation I've had with my students and with my residents and with colleagues all the time, is that while our charge is to first do no harm and to take care of all of our patients, that does not give our patients a right to then discriminate against us. And I have had direct conversations with patients that have been offensive to my students, to my peers, and to myself in a way that I say that is not acceptable. And so that is something that's difficult to then do, because we are in a service industry where people think that the patient is always right, even when the patient is clearly being wrong. And a patient being sexist or misogynist or racist does not mean I'm going to give them any less level of care. But I am absolutely going to acknowledge the fact that as a human being in or outside of this healthcare system, that is not something that I will be putting up with. And absolutely, as a bystander, I am someone that, as best I can, because of the positions I am in, I speak up for the individuals that oftentimes are voiceless in those scenarios. So one comment about the experiences regarding equity in more homogenous societies. And I absolutely, so this is what I will say is that equity, and this is where I'll get to my last slide to then go into this, the heart of this conversation, is that disability is the beautiful sort of lens that I use to have these conversations because it is ubiquitous. Disability does not discriminate based on race or gender or socioeconomic status or anything. And it's the one demographic group that every single one of us has the potential to be in and may be in at some point in our lives. And so when I talk to people about disability, and I talk about advocating for disability rights, what I am doing is I'm really leveraging this as the way that we can talk about the rights that every single person deserves. Because I talk about these intersecting Venn diagrams, that when you then try to parse out each individual's identity, and you look at each of these identities, when I talk about me being a young, Black, Nigerian, Christian, male physician, you know, of these intersecting Venn diagrams, there will be things that other people will intersect within me, and they may not relate to me because I'm a Black man, but they may relate to me because I'm Christian. They may not relate to me because I'm Christian, but because I'm an immigrant. They may not relate because I'm an immigrant, but because I identify as having a disability. But in those discussions and getting to know people, you recognize once again that we have much more in common than we are apart. And if we can then find those commonalities, we'll be able to then get to the point of caring for people. And even in homogenous or seemingly homogenous groups, the assumption is that because someone is of a specific demographic or a specific group that appears homogenous on the outside, there's not enough conversation about the nuances in those people's identities and what may intersect with them on a place that you would never know, right? And I said that we cannot ignore what's happening right now, but I think that the problem, in my opinion, and I'll go there, the problem, in my opinion, with some of the systems that we have in place is that we are forcing people to then be homogenous. We are forcing people to say that if you fall into this specific party, this means you must believe all of these things without having your own, you know, thought or opinion on being able to say that this is wrong or this is right because you are in a quote unquote homogenous group. And I think that what we have the power to do within medicine is to then be those individuals to say that these things are not black and white, and this homogenous group that I'm in is still a diverse group that has its own set of experiences and perspectives that then keep in mind what is best for all of us. Because politics should be that, but I really think that medicine will be that. Because what we are here to do is to care for people. And we are then the ones that are able to, when people are literally putting their lives in our hands, are able to then give people that reminder that there's still a space in this country and in this world where that can be true. And specifically within OB, I've given this talk multiple times to then OB programs, and it's something that unique to the work that you all do is I think where you've been put in a position where you have an opportunity to really change the way that current and future generations view this, and I'll get to that point a little later. So this last slide is one that I add to the end of these conversations because it is a similar looking slide, but what it is it now has two sides once again. And on one side, it has three individuals, once again, a taller individual and then sort of a medium height individual. And then the smallest individual is now sitting in a wheelchair. And then if you look at the complexion, each of these individuals has a slightly different complexion. You may believe that some of these individuals are male and some may identify as being female. And then what happened is that on the far right slide, instead of boxes, they have now built a ramp for the individual with the wheelchair. And then that individual in the wheelchair now is able to see over the fence. The individual that was sort of in the medium height now has two boxes and can see over the fence. And then the individual that was the tallest no longer has any box and they see as well. And this is one of these things where we say, if you find what it is that people need, I talk about those boxes. And if you can conceptualize that it probably took the same amount of wood to build a ramp than it would have taken to give a box, the resource allocation is not always more to provide access for individuals. And if you looked at the other slides as well, if you looked at it, there were three boxes on either side. And this just talks about sort of resource allocation. And it just means where you put your resources should be ideally in the area of greatest need, which then provides people with what they need to be able to have that access. And so to launch into the disability specific portion of this, after kind of laying some groundwork, I want people to see this as, if you recognize that individuals with disabilities deserve just as much access to the same opportunities as everyone else, then we should be able to think outside of the box, literally, in terms of what it is that provides those individuals with the access that they need in order to be successful. Now, I gave a TED Talk a few months ago where I talked about the two pandemics that we're dealing with right now, which were COVID-19 and racism. And I talked about how the COVID-19 pandemic was already disproportionately impacting certain communities, and those were communities of color and individuals with disabilities. Now, this is a slide from the WHO, which identifies some of the ways that individuals with disabilities were potentially at greater risk of contracting COVID, or that ways that people could try to reduce their exposure to COVID, that people were not talking about at the beginning. People were not recognizing that in some of these populations, it is individuals with disabilities and pre-existing conditions that were being impacted, just like we talked about and continue to recognize that communities of color were being disproportionately impacted. And what this talk was about the fact that none of these things are new. This thing, COVID-19, just unearthed and exacerbated already problematic societal structures and things that were in place long before COVID-19 existed, that then gave us an opportunity to highlight these things already. And so once again, if we all as healthcare providers can then look at every situation that we're in, and the simple phrase I say is to take sort of stock of who's at the table or who is being silenced, and we then try to make sure that we do our best to then provide access for those individuals. Because if we provide that access for those individuals, we will be providing access for everyone. And a phrase I use is that everyone can use the ramp, while not everyone can use the stairs. And so if we start to create ramps to give access to everyone in the work that we do, we will then truly be recognizing that we want to then factor in everyone in this conversation. And what happens, in my opinion, too often as well, especially within some of the underrepresented and minoritized groups, is that because it seems as though it's a zero-sum game, one of the things that we tend to do is that we focus on our needs without necessarily seeing how our needs intersect with others. And it's something that ends up making it such that we all end up being divided in the work that we do. And one of the wonderful groups that's come together here at Michigan is we have our Student Diversity Council, which has essentially brought together all of these different minority groups to say, this is not the same thing as saying all lives matter. And I'm going to say that very directly, because I 100% support saying Black Lives Matter, because too often it's been demonstrated that they don't. And I fully support the desire and the need to be able to speak into existence that Black lives do matter. Because people that say all lives matter are trying to say that we do not support stating that Black lives matter. But I will say that Black lives matter, but then we need to make sure that as we are doing that, we recognize that as healthcare providers, yes, we do acknowledge that all lives matter. And so we are not going to say that in conflict or counter to Black Lives Mattering, because if Black lives were demonstrated to have mattered before, there would have been no need to make that movement. Similar to how I say, if diversity, equity, and inclusion were integral into all of our systems, we would not have to have diversity offices. We would not have to have chief diversity officers. And I say that at every institution I go to, prepared to be ostracized, because it's often the diversity office that invites me. And they're saying, are you trying to get rid of my job? And I say, you know what, ideally, yes. Because if this was something that was already ingrained in all that we did, there would be no need for this. But unfortunately, there is absolutely a need for this everywhere across the country, because it is blatantly obvious that this work is not being done, it is not being recognized, and therefore all of my colleagues across the country that have these roles are individuals that need to be further supported. And right now it's the students and the residents and your generation of individuals that are recognizing the importance of this. It is these populations that have been identifying the marginalized groups that have been long discriminated against and have been trying to speak up and advocate in a system that has not historically been made for them. And so I thank you and your generation, because it is truly the work that you all are doing, have been doing, and hopefully will continue to do, that is getting our systems to recognize the imperative that we have to be able to create a system that is different from the one that we had in the past. And so I thank you all for the work that you're doing. And I know that with, Dr. Green, who I've been sort of keeping up with her and the work she's done since I met her years ago at a conference, that I know that UNC is in good hands. I have colleagues at UNC that are doing wonderful things also. And I want to make sure that during this conversation, after this conversation, that I am just an additional individual that you will add to your contact list. And if there's any way that I can continue to be of service and help throughout this time, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. So I'm not going to go very long into my story, but I talk about the fact that, as I said earlier, I am in a very privileged position, having gone to Stanford University and Deerfield Academy and Michigan and Yale and Notre Dame, having these degrees that have made people look at me and think that because of that pedigree, I've reached a certain level. However, I know that there are still people that see me and all they see is a Black man. That has been the case all of my life. And despite the fact that I have these degrees, I know that people still look at me and think that I cannot or should not do certain things and that I should not be allowed certain access. After then having my disability, I tell people very directly, and that having had my spinal cord injury and then being paralyzed from my chest down with minimal use of my upper extremities, it was after that point that I truly started to feel what it was like, and this is a contentious statement that I'll make, but I truly then felt what it was to be discriminated against. Now, this is not saying that I did not feel discriminated against as a Black man in this country, as a Nigerian Black man in this country, going to a bunch of PWIs. Now, I absolutely did throughout my life. But after then having a disability and entering this world, as I call it, from the other side of the stethoscope, I started to see how something that I felt was a seemingly, trivial shift in the way that I interacted with the world then led me to a place where people looked at me, my degrees were still there, my knowledge was still there, but simply because I didn't walk the same way other people walked, I all of a sudden lost years of my life from the place that I thought I'd been able to get to based on education. And then that was a selfish knowledge that I recognized. And then I saw the people that didn't have multiple degrees, that lived with disability, that did not have the access that I was now fighting for myself, that they've been fighting for their entire lives. And so I recognize that from my position of privilege, of having that previous experience, I have been allowed to be at the table in multiple spaces that then my peers would not have been given that same access to be. And that is where then I hope to then leverage my voice in those spaces to then bring up this point of disability not being inability. And I talk about disability in terms of apparent or visible and non-apparent or invisible disabilities. Because whether it's a spinal cord injury or anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, autism, a reading disorder, dyslexia, all of these things contribute to what disability is and the stigma that people then feel by saying that because we all are on this vast spectrum of what human life is. And now to start getting into the conversation about you specifically as obstetrician and gynecologist, you are there at this intersection of life where you are there bringing new life into the world. You are able to have a conversation with these parents about the potential that their child can have. And I know prior to my disability and then after my disability, the conversations that we have about what potential people may have or what some sort of birth defect or pre-existing condition that existed prior to you even being born then puts you in a category of individuals that people are expecting less of. In your roles, you have the ability to reassure these parents that the potential that their child has to be successful has not been changed because of whatever diagnosis that they have, because of anything that you've seen in utero. Now, that is not to say that we ignore science and that we then, blow smoke and tell all these fantastic stories about everything people can be. But I do think that we have a unique ability to combine medicine with the fact that we can recognize that there's still so much we do not know about medicine. And I use my story as just an N of one as an individual that knows the things that have been afforded to me after I've had my disability. So I show this slide. This slide shows me actually the one on the left is me in a standing frame wheelchair. And I'm actually on OB at the time, looking at a slide to then, at the time, this was new to me, well, not new, but this was a new thing brought back into my life. But I was looking there, looking for little Christmas tree type things, right? It's years ago now. What are we talking about? Ferning, right? So I was an OB trying to look at ferning on a slide. And remind you, this is me as a young Black man that was an orthopedic surgeon that now has a spinal cord injury and is in a family medicine residency in a system in which we have our OBs are the ones that staff our family medicine OB rotation. And so I was in an unopposed program, no OB residence, and here I was being an individual on OB. What my institution did is they assumed competence is the word that I've used. And rather than judging me or limiting me based on what they thought I could not do, they allowed me to show them what I could do. And then this chair is what gave me an opportunity to be able to fully be involved in the OB world and in the surgical world in a way that without that chair I would not have been. And so you can all put yourself in a position, and I talk about OB nurses, and I love OB nurses, and I'm sure many of you residents can recognize, but OB nurses are very often mother hen in a way, and they have complete sort of, protection over the patients. And you dare not try to go into a patient's room, right after they've finally gotten them comfortable and gotten them on their side in a way that they're going to take a little rest and they're going to, labor down for a bit. You best not go and in there as a medical student and say it's time for your cervical check when the resident or the faculty had just come in 10 minutes before. And so they're very protective of the patients, and for good reason. But so here I come into this world where they didn't know me from Adam, and I'm expecting that I'm going to be able to then participate in OB care. Already with the dynamic of many people, and I told you guys, I spit truth, the dynamic of how some people feel about family physicians doing OB in a world where then people feel as that the OBs should be the ones doing OB. So they assumed competence and allowed me to participate in this work. Now, this was at a time that I was still trying to figure out how I was even going to be able to then be part of the medical world after now having a disability, which left me with poor dexterity, limited core strength, and the inability to then stand up and walk around. But by working together and using available resources, they gave me the access to be able to do this work. Now, I'll tell you a funny story that in person, this talk is a lot more interactive than it is via the chat like this, but that standing frame chair is something that made me look like somewhat of a transformer, because I would go into these rooms, and oftentimes, when you're on L&D and your shift change, you might meet this, laboring mom for the first time when you're about to then deliver the baby. So then I go in there, I zip in a wheelchair. She doesn't know me before, sees this dude roll in, we deliver this baby. That chair has the ability, it's a hydraulic chair that allows me to stand up without having to use my hands. So I would deliver the baby, then stand up with this chair and place baby on mom's belly. And almost inevitably every time, big brother or sister would be in the corner like, oh my God, it's a transformer. And then mom would forget that she just pushed the baby out and be looking at me like, how'd you do that? And I'm like, you just gave birth. Anyway, so that chair was this amazing to have people see that this person who I would have thought is disabled, how is he going to deliver my baby? How is he going to do these things? But something simple as a standing frame wheelchair then gave me the opportunity to be involved. The next step I talk about is the image on the next slide, which is me. This is actually me in the cath lab about to do a radial art line, but it's still the same setup that I had for then going into a C-section. And so once again, people would assume that, oh, Dr. O, it's really great that she can do these vaginal deliveries, but when something goes sideways and we need to get into the OR stat to be able to do a C-section, we just don't know if we're going to be able to get you in there. They didn't do that either. They then assumed competence. They came up with a way that we would then be able to have a sterile technique for me to get into the OR. And then guess what? On the other side of the table from the OBs that are doing the C-section, they recognize that they just don't have another physician or resident. They have an individual who had 3 years of surgical experience. Even if it was orthopedic surgical experience, it was surgical experience. And then they recognize that nothing against my co-residents, but I had more surgical experience than any of my co-residents. And so I was an asset in the OR. And I knew, oh, Michigan wins. Sorry, thank you very much, Marcy Willis Gray. I'm not, you know what? I was gonna say I'm not gonna out myself. I'm fine out myself. I'm happy that Biden won Michigan. There you go, now I know how I stand. Anyway, so they would allow me to then be in there and allowed me as an orthopedic surgery resident that knew how to operate, that then they had an asset at the operating table with them. I knew when to cut, I knew when to suck, I knew when to dab, I knew when to get out of the way. And so that was something that if they had not given me an opportunity to be involved in that, then we would have had, there would have been, I'm not gonna say there would have been worse outcomes, but there would have been limited opportunity for me to be able to demonstrate what I could do. And that changed the minds of many of the physicians within our group, because then that was just an N of one, as I said. I do not think that I'm a unicorn in some way, that there's nobody else that has the ability to do the things that I do. It's just that I have been given access to be able to do those things. And then people made an assumption about me based on things that were not my doing. It was not my doing that both of my parents were physicians. It was not my doing that both of my parents, put in hard work to then create a life for me, that I was in a different demographic than others. It was not my doing that, and this is another direct thing, that I'm an African and not an African American, because we know that we view these individuals differently because of the fact that I'm Nigerian and not Black American. People still put me in a different demographic. And so there were lots of things that were not my doing that then gave me a leg up, that allowed me to have a certain level of privilege to be able to then engage in a way and be at the table in places that people would not have let me be able to do. And so my goal now is to be able to then let other people recognize that disability is not inability, that I am not the only individual living with a disability that has the ability to then do things. It is just that many other of these individuals have not been given access to these things before. Now, I tell you, I put this slide up there a little bit to then show one of the aspects of what I now try to do in terms of trying to then show this. So I mentioned to you all that I played sports throughout my entire life. I was an All-American athlete at Stanford. I was a captain of my team and almost considered training for the Olympics. But my Nigerian family had different plans, and I went straight to medical school instead of taking a year off and training. Now, I say that with a caveat. I didn't say that it was a guarantee I was going to go to the Olympics, but I was going to take a year off and train for the Olympics. So after having my spinal cord injury, and then I entering this world of disability, I saw that there were individuals that played sports. So adaptive sports are sports that most people say are sports for people with disabilities. I have tried to sort of put a change and a spin on this, and I say adaptive sports are sports that just allow everyone to be able to participate together. And so these are sports like wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, seated volleyball, ambulatory track and field. And these are sports that truly allow everyone to participate regardless of ability. Now, the thing I must mention is that the Special Olympics and the Paralympics are two very different things. They're two important movements that are needed, but I think too often people conflate Special Olympics with Paralympics, and that is the impression they have in their minds. I show this slide because the University of Alabama, which it pains me to even say this, but the University of Alabama has probably one of the, if not the premier adaptive sports program in the world. And that building that you see in the middle is their athletic facility that is dedicated solely to adaptive athletics. That basketball court you see is for their basketball team. The gym you see at the bottom is for their workout facility. The image at the other bottom right side is just sort of the entrance to that facility. And the top right is their locker room, which then if you watch these videos, they talk about how the floor is angled so that those chairs don't roll out in the way that they are put in there. But one of the videos talks about how at the University of Alabama, they treat their adaptive athletes as athletes and not as disabled athletes. And once again, that's to show that they're individuals that deserve the same level of access that everybody else has, yet there's so many aspects of our world and in our country where people are not given that. So within my scope as a physician, I have now then created this adaptive sports and fitness program at the University of Michigan, where we are aiming to do the same thing by recognizing that physical fitness is something that everybody needs regardless of ability level. And whether you have a spinal cord injury, cerebral palsy, spina bifida, the need for physical activity is something that we all have. And that can be from being an intramural, recreational, or club sport athlete to just a weekend warrior that wants to then get out and get exercise with your friends, to someone that wants to be a Paralympic athlete and go to the Paralympic Games in Tokyo 2021. And so what we've been doing is we're creating a program at Michigan that we now have 8 adaptive student athletes competing in sports from wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, ambulatory track and field, and para-equestrian. We've got a research component as well, which is looking at how we can then demonstrate the importance of this from a research standpoint, because if things aren't published, then they don't exist to many people in academia. And so we need to then make sure that we can then leave our footprint there as well. We are then working, since I have a role as the director of services for students with disabilities, to then demonstrate that once again, these disabilities are not just physical disabilities alone, but we need to provide equal access for these students to be successful within their collegiate careers as well. And this gives students an opportunity to then get to school, play a sport, get their degree, and then be able to demonstrate that they have the same potential to be successful as everybody else. And so one of the takeaways that I tell people is that if you learn only one thing from this conversation today, is that adaptive sports exist. If there's one way, because people always ask, Dr. O, what is it that we can do to then make a difference, right? I told you about how you can then communicate with your mothers, when they then find a diagnosis that is something that would have otherwise been seen as devastating. And it doesn't mean that the diagnosis is no less devastating, but being able to tell people that there are resources that will exist, that your child will be able to have the same life that you wanted them to have, It may look a little different. It may need a little modification, accommodation. It may need a different resource to give them access, but there are things that they can do, and they should not then feel as though, oh, woe is them, because their child now has something that makes them different. Because once again, all of us are different in some way, and there'll be many children that are born without looking or seeming any different, but will go on to have a non-apparent disability that then will seemingly be that turning point in that family's life where they've now learned that their seemingly perfect child has some sort of imperfection. And as OBs, I think we have the ability to normalize these imperfections, to say that all of us has something. And as physicians, we can also lead the charge to recognize that we are not omniscient, omnipotent, and like infallible. And we as physicians welcome individuals into our ranks that have disabilities, because they are just another visible representation of the diversity of the world in which we live. And we are striving to then have a population of physicians that then represents the individuals that we serve. Because if people talk often about how you can't be what you can't see, and if we don't have female physicians, if we don't have Black male physicians, if we don't have physicians with disabilities, if we don't have physicians that wear hijab, if we don't have physicians that, that celebrate multiple different religions and holidays and eat different foods and have different names, then the people that come into our walls are going to feel as though they aren't welcome. And that is something that then demonstrates why diversity is so important in the work that we do. I don't need to go into all of the data that talks about race concordance in their providers. I don't need to talk about the disparities in healthcare that exist for these minoritized and disenfranchised groups. These are things that have been borne out to be true over and over and over again. However, it is the connection to individual stories that moves this needle. It is recognizing that the individual across the aisle from you is more similar to you than they are not, because no matter how much we publish, no matter how much we scream it down people's necks, it takes people having a personal experience to change it. And I will use myself as an N of one to say, I did not think that I was actively keeping people with disabilities out of the work that I was doing. And I know that I was not intentionally doing so, but that does not mean that I did not have room for improvement. That did not mean that then after having my spinal cord injury, when my eyes were then opened to this world that I had never seen before, I am now dedicated to trying to then make my little mark in showing, not just for disability, but disability, race, all marginalized groups, that we all do deserve to have a seat at the table. And each of us is able to, once again, as a broken record, look around at that table and notice who is either missing or silenced, and do whatever we can to then invite them to the table, make room, and allow them to speak. So with that, I will try to allow you all to speak, because I told y'all that I never said I don't like talking. I just said I don't like giving talks, I like starting conversations. But y'all were silent on the chat except for talking about a Cuba Gooding Jr. movie, and I missed it. So I apologize for not giving you more opportunities. But my goal is that this is just the start to this conversation for you all, and that this conversation will continue after I leave, and that it will just hopefully give you a small example of some of the ways that you can then advocate for your patients, for your colleagues, for your peers, for individuals with disabilities that they may not even know that they have the potential to do more, because our society does not create that narrative. But you can be the one giving this young child, giving this mother or father the opportunity to then recognize that there are so many more things that may be in store for their child, and that because they are born with a disability or they're diagnosed with a disability in utero, that that is not absolutely going to then change the entire trajectory of their life for the worse. So I will then open up the floor for the last minute if there are any more questions or comments people want to make, but want to be respectful of your time, because I know this was supposed to end at 4:30.
If anyone has a question and wants to ask it, please, you can message it into the chat, or you can also unmute yourself. I do just want to say, before we run out of time, thank you to Dr. O so much for sharing your story and for giving us this advice and insight into how we can change the way that we view ability, and make sure that we are not othering our patients, their families, in the ways that we take care of them, and the spaces that we create where we take care of them. Looks like we have a couple questions, and other appreciation for your time. One is there a country you can think of that does this better than others, or maybe better than ours? Any answer to that?
I was answering to that one in the text right now. I would say that the UK actually recognizes adaptive sports. They have the Invictus Games, which is something that, Prince Harry, I think, started it, but they recognize adaptive sports in a way that we do not. But I will also say that no country does this very well. It's just like anything with respect to DE&I initiatives. There will be wins and losses, and there'll be certain people that do a certain aspect of it well. But I think that I try to eliminate sort of these dichotomies and these black and whites to say one is good, one is bad. And I'll say there are people that approach it differently, and there are aspects of it that I would wish to see that ours are the same. But there are also places where I'd say that the United States, I'd say, has resources that are allocated in ways that are different, such that I feel honored to then be here to do this work, because I've traveled and I've seen the resources and lack thereof in other places pertaining to disability. And I know that I'm from Nigeria. I've been back to Nigeria. I did this talk with sort of some Nigerian folks a couple weeks ago about accessibility in our countries. Because for all of you that may or may not know, this is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act year, and also the 75th anniversary of the Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so there's been a lot of conversation around disability, and Nigeria is trying to essentially create their equivalent of the ADA. And so I would not be able to have the same access to resources in Nigeria as I have here. And I've lived in Nigeria. I've been back recently. And it's something that it continues to humble me, because it almost makes me want to shut my mouth when I come back here, because I know that the resources that exist here, even though they're still not equitably distributed, are so much better than in many other places. And therefore, that's what sort of drives me even more to not just change what we do here, but to try to take that to other low resource areas and show that there's still more things that we can do. And it doesn't even start with the resources first. It starts with the stigma, it starts with the mentality, it starts with the culture to recognize that individuals with disabilities deserve it in the first place, right? We need to change this mentality that disability is an ability, that it's a sickness, that it's an illness, that it's something that needs to be rectified all of the time, rather than it being the structures and the infrastructure and the society that is wrong. And there's a perfect quote that I forget who said it now, and I need to look her up again, but there's someone that I connected with on Twitter that was talking about how often people look at her and they say, "What's wrong with you?" Right? And not in a negative way. People are often like, "Oh, if they see you in a chair, they say, oh, well, what's wrong with you?" Or "What's wrong with your legs?" And she said, "Nothing is wrong with me. I'm disabled. I'm not wrong." And I think if that's a way that you can sort of think about, this population, that disability itself should not be taboo. It should not be seen as this negative, right? Because all of us have some sort of something, whether it manifests, younger or older, or whether it comes out or not, we all have something that then makes us wrong in that sense. And if we continue to look at pathology from this standpoint of a negative, especially as physicians, we are trained up to think this way, really, that we look at pathology as something to be rectified. And that's an important thing to then do as physicians. But if we do not let that to cross over sort of into the social context of our worlds as well, and then we don't look at people with disabilities or with, any sort of medical issue as wrong or as damaged, but we then say, what is it about our structures and societies that limits the people's potential to be able to then get access? That is the sort of that bridge that we can build to then create access for all.
Okay. I also want to respect everyone's time. I can assure you, we were quiet because you had our rapt attention, but not because we didn't enjoy everything that you had to say. And we'll be posting this lecture on YouTube. So for those of you your classmates or your coworkers were not able to join us live, that's true. We'll make sure to post this and we'll tweet the link and post it on Instagram as well. And hopefully, Dr. O, we can have you come back, because I'm curious as to what these great part 2s and 3s are. So we'll talk to you soon, and we'll wish everyone a great rest of post-election day. Get something good to eat, and take care of yourself. Thank you.
Thank you all for the opportunity.